the morning Beatrice finally decided she was done being destroyed quietly, she was standing in her own kitchen, holding a cup of tea she had not touched, listening to her mother-in-law's voice carry through the walls like a blade looking for skin. Kenneth, Madame Agatha's voice was low, deliberate, the kind of low that is louder than shouting. I am asking you a serious question as your mother. How long are you going to keep managing a woman who cannot give you children? How long? Beatrice did not move. She stood there, fingers wrapped around that warm cup, and she listened to her husband's response, which was silence. Not the silence of a man searching for words to defend his wife, the silence of a man who had already decided whose side he was on. That silence told Beatrice everything. It told her more than 5 years of marriage had told her, more than 5 years of desperate prayers whispered into pillows at 3 a.m., of watching her own reflection in the mirror and asking God what was wrong with her. 5 years of Madame Agatha arriving at their home unannounced, sitting in the best chair, eating the food Beatrice cooked, and then using that same mouth to dismantle her daughter-in-law's dignity before the plates were even cleared. But here's what nobody in that house knew yet. 3 days ago, Beatrice had opened an old briefcase she had never seen before, buried at the back of their bedroom wardrobe like a secret that knew it was guilty. She had opened it casually, expecting nothing. What she found inside had dropped her to her knees on the bedroom floor, shaking, crying the kind of tears that do not make sound because the pain is too enormous for noise. A medical report, Kenneth's name, a date that was 2 full years before their wedding day, a verdict that changed everything. Beatrice set her cup down gently, straightened her back, and smiled for the first time in years because she finally understood the game her husband had been playing, and she had just decided to end it. To understand what Beatrice found in that briefcase, you have to go back to the beginning, back to the woman she was before Kenneth, before Madame Agatha, before the word barren became the sentence her life was organized around. Beatrice had grown up as the responsible one, the daughter who finished what she started, who loved carefully, who believed that if you were a good woman and you tried hard enough, life would be fair to you. She was not naive, she was faithful. There's a difference. And when Kenneth came into her life, charming and patient and full of the kind of attention that makes a woman feel truly seen, she gave him everything she had without measuring it first. Their wedding was beautiful. Madame Agatha had smiled that day, a real smile, warm and wide, because back then she approved of Beatrice. Back then, Beatrice was an asset. The shift began quietly, the way all dangerous things begin. 1 year passed with no pregnancy. Then 2. Madame Agatha's visits, which had once felt like family, began to feel like inspections. She would look at Beatrice's stomach the way you look at a pot you suspect has a crack in it, searching, calculating, already disappointed. "Have you seen a doctor?" she asked one afternoon, and the question sounded innocent but landed like an accusation. "We are working on it, Mama," Beatrice answered carefully. "We." Madame Agatha repeated the word like it tasted strange. "My son is not the problem. Let us be honest about that." Kenneth was in the room when she said it. He looked up from his phone, looked at his mother, looked at his wife, and said absolutely nothing. That was the first time Beatrice felt it. That cold, specific feeling of realizing that the person who is supposed to stand beside you has quietly stepped aside to let the crowd reach you. She told herself she was imagining things. She was not imagining things. Madame Agatha had a gift. Not the kind of gift you celebrate, the kind you survive. She could walk into a room, sit down, accept every comfort that room offered, and then systematically dismantle the person who provided those comforts without raising her voice above a conversational tone. It was almost artistic, the precision with which she operated. She visited every weekend without fail, sometimes twice. She never called ahead because calling ahead would give Beatrice time to prepare, and Madame Agatha preferred her daughter-in-law unprepared.
One Saturday morning, she arrived before 9, when Beatrice was still in her house clothes, hair wrapped, floor half swept. She walked past Beatrice at the door without greeting her, settled into the sitting room sofa, and immediately began speaking to Kenneth as though Beatrice was furniture. Your cousin Adaeze just had her third child. 3 children in 4 years. That is a woman who understands her purpose. It started with a suggestion so simple. It should have had a simple answer. Kenneth, Beatrice said one evening after dinner, her hands folded on the table between them. I think we should go to a fertility specialist. Together. Let us just find out properly what is happening and how we can fix it. The temperature in the room changed immediately. Kenneth set his fork down slowly, deliberately, the way a man sets something down when he's buying himself time to construct something. Then he looked at her, not with concern, not with the openness of a husband willing to face a problem beside his wife, but with something that looked remarkably like irritation. So now you are saying something is wrong with me? I did not say that, because that is what I'm hearing, Beatrice. I'm hearing that you think I am the problem. Kenneth, I said together. I meant both of us. I know what you meant. I know exactly what you meant. You have been listening to your sister too much. Mavis has always had something to say about our marriage. And just like that, with a skill that Beatrice would only fully understand much later, Kenneth had moved the argument from fertility to loyalty, from medicine to suspicion, from a conversation about their future to an accusation about her character. By the time the night was over, Beatrice was the one apologizing. She wasn't even sure what she was apologizing for. This happened 4 times over 2 years. 4 separate attempts to raise the same reasonable, loving suggestion, and 4 masterfully executed redirections that always ended with Beatrice doubting herself more than she had before she asked. Kenneth was not arguing with her. He was managing her. There is a catastrophic difference. And somewhere in the back of their bedroom wardrobe, undisturbed, patient like a buried thing that knows it will eventually be found, an old briefcase sat in the dark, holding a truth that would one day bring everything down. Beatrice continued sweeping. I was at the naming ceremony yesterday, Madam Agatha continued, louder now, making sure every word carried. People were asking about you, Kenneth, asking when your own house will have good news. I did not know what to tell them. What do you tell people when there is nothing to say? Kenneth picked up the television remote. Mama, let us not. I am only saying what everyone is already thinking. A home without children is an incomplete home. That is not my opinion. That is nature. Beatrice set the broom against the wall. She walked to the kitchen. She stood over the sink, gripping the edge of it with both hands, breathing slowly, counting silently the way her mother had taught her when she was a little girl and the world felt too heavy. She had done this so many times the counting had become automatic. What she did not know then, what she could not have known, was that the man sitting in her living room casually flipping television channels while her mother poisoned the air was carrying a secret so devastating it would eventually rewrite everything she thought she knew about her own life.
Mavis was not the kind of woman who watched her sister drown and threw her a motivational quote. She was the kind who jumped in, grabbed her by the collar, and dragged her to the surface whether she was ready or not. She had watched Beatrice shrink over 5 years, watched a woman who used to fill every room she entered slowly become someone who apologized for taking up space. And on a Tuesday evening, when she came to visit and found Beatrice sitting alone in the kitchen, staring at nothing, eyes dry in the specific way that means all the tears have already been used up, Mavis sat down across from her, folded her hands on the table, and said what she had been holding back for too long. Beatrice, I need you to listen to me carefully.
Not as your sister, as a medical professional. Beatrice looked up slowly. I have spent 5 years accepting that you are the problem, but nobody has actually confirmed that. Nobody has run the proper tests. You have been convicted without evidence, and you are serving a sentence for something that has never even been proven. The words landed quietly, but they landed hard. Kenneth will never agree to. I am not talking about Kenneth. Mavis leaned forward. I am talking about you. You can go alone. You have every right to know what is happening inside your own body, and that right does not require your husband's permission. Beatrice was silent for a long time. What if they confirm it is me? She finally whispered. What if I go and they tell me the same thing Kenneth and his mother have been saying all along? Mavis reached across the table and held her sister's hand firmly. Then at least you will know the truth. And the truth, even when it hurts, is always better than a lie that is slowly killing you. That conversation was the turning point. Not dramatic, not loud, just two sisters at a kitchen table at night, one of them finally deciding that she deserved answers. 3 weeks later, Beatrice walked into a fertility clinic for the first time in her life, alone, heart hammering, hands cold. She told no one, not a single person, not even Kenneth, especially not Kenneth. The tests took months, not days, not weeks, months. Blood work, hormone panels, ultrasounds, specialist consultations, follow-up appointments that required Beatrice to invent reasons to leave the house without raising Kenneth's suspicion. She became skilled at it. A dental appointment here, a visit to an old friend there, small, harmless lies that protected the one true thing she was finally doing for herself. And through all of it, Madame Agatha kept visiting, kept performing. One afternoon during those months, Madame Agatha arrived unannounced as always, and this time she had brought company. 2 women from her church, introduced with the kind of deliberate casualness that is absolutely not casual. These are my sisters in the Lord, Madame Agatha said, settling into the sofa. I have told them to join me in praying for this house. A house that has been silent for too long needs serious spiritual intervention. Beatrice served them drinks with a steady hand and a face that revealed absolutely nothing. The women prayed loudly, dramatically, the kind of aggressive prayer that is less about God and more about audience. They rebuked spirits of barrenness. They commanded stubborn wombs to open. They spoke directly to Beatrice's body as though it were a disobedient child. Madame Agatha watched her daughter-in-law's face throughout every single word of that prayer, searching hungrily for the crack, for the flinch, for the tears that would confirm her daughter-in-law was broken enough to be pitied and controlled. Beatrice gave her nothing. Because Beatrice was thinking about her last appointment, about the doctor's calm, professional voice, about the preliminary results that were already beginning to point in a direction nobody in this sitting room could have imagined. When the women finally left, and Madame Agatha lingered, as she always did, picking at the silence like a wound she wanted to keep open, she looked at Beatrice with narrowed eyes. You seem very unbothered today, she said carefully. I am well, Mama, Beatrice replied simply. Madame Agatha studied her for a long, uncomfortable moment. Then she picked up her bag and left. Outside, the results Beatrice was waiting for were almost ready. And when they finally arrived, printed cleanly on official hospital letterhead, signed and stamped by 2 separate consultants, they said something so clear, so undeniable, that Beatrice had to read the page 3 times before her hand stopped shaking. She was completely fine. Every test, every panel, every measure that mattered, completely fine. Beatrice sat in her car outside the second hospital for a very long time. The engine was off, the results were in her lap, the afternoon sun was pressing through the windscreen, but she could not feel its warmth because every sensation in her body had been overtaken by one single, enormous realization that was slowly expanding inside her chest, like something that had been compressed for years and had finally found room to breathe. She was fine. 2 hospitals, 2 completely independent sets of doctors, months of thorough, painstaking testing, and the conclusion was identical across every single result. Beatrice was a healthy woman with absolutely no medical barrier to conception, which meant only one thing. She drove home in complete silence. No music, no phone calls. She needed to think. Not emotionally, not reactively, but clearly, surgically, because the woman who had walked into that first clinic months ago was afraid and broken and desperate for someone to tell her what was wrong with her. But the woman sitting in this car right now was different. Something had shifted permanently behind her eyes. That evening, Kenneth came home, ate the dinner she served, complained the soup needed more pepper, and went to bed without asking her a single question about her day. He never asked her days anymore. He had stopped being curious about her entirely, which she now understood was intentional. An invisible woman does not investigate. An invisible woman does not dig. She watched him sleep that night from her side of the bed. Really watched him. The way you look at something when you are finally seeing it clearly after years of deliberately blurred vision. This man had looked into her eyes on their wedding day and made promises over a secret that was already rotting underneath everything he said. The next morning, while Kenneth was in the bathroom and she was making the bed, her hands moving automatically, tucking corners, smoothing sheets, she moved the small reading chair in the corner to vacuum beneath it. Then she shifted the wardrobe slightly, and that was when she saw it. An old briefcase, partially hidden behind a folded wrapper on the wardrobe floor, dusty at the edges, latched shut. She had never seen it before in 5 years of living in this bedroom. She stared at it for a moment, then she heard the bathroom door handle turn, and she quietly moved everything back, filed the briefcase's location somewhere precise and deliberate in her memory, and continued making the bed. She would come back to it when she was completely alone. The day she opened the briefcase, Kenneth had gone to his mother's house. Of course he had. He went there the way other men go to the gym, regularly, enthusiastically, always returning somehow more insufferable than when he left. Beatrice had smiled and waved him off at the door, and the moment his car turned the corner, she was already moving. She retrieved the briefcase from the wardrobe floor and carried it to the bed. It was heavier than it looked. The latch opened without resistance, as though even the briefcase was tired of keeping this secret. Inside were documents, old papers, some folded, some clipped together. Her eyes moved quickly, scanning, until they found it, a single white envelope, unsealed, with Kenneth's full name written in the careful handwriting of someone official. She removed the document inside and read it. Then she read it again. Then she sat down on the floor because her legs simply stopped working. It was a medical report from a private clinic, detailed, clinical, unambiguous. It assessed Kenneth's reproductive health comprehensively and arrived at a conclusion stated in plain, devastating language. There was a 1% chance of Kenneth fathering a biological child. The cause was a congenital condition present from birth, permanent and irreversible. The date at the top of that report was 2 years and 4 months before their wedding day. Beatrice pressed the paper against her chest and cried in a way she had never cried before. Not the exhausted, defeated crying of a woman who believes she is broken, but the raw, volcanic grief of a woman who has just discovered that her suffering was never an accident. It was a decision, made deliberately, by someone who had looked at her love and calculated how to use it against her. Every cruel word Madame Agatha had ever spoken rose up in her memory. Every family gathering where she had sat quietly absorbing blame. Every night she had knelt beside her bed and begged God to fix whatever was wrong with her. Nothing had been wrong with her. Nothing had been wrong with her. She cried until the crying was finished. Then she photographed the document carefully with her phone, folded it, and placed it inside her brassiere, close to her heart, where it would be safe. She returned the briefcase to its exact position, latched it, covered it. Then she called Mavis. "Sister," she said, her voice completely steady, "I need you to come. I have found something, and I have a plan." Mavis arrived within the hour. She read the document once, set it down on the kitchen table, and was silent for exactly 4 seconds before she exhaled, so sharply that it sounded like something tearing. "Beatrice, I know. He knew before the wedding. He knew." "Mavis." Beatrice looked at her sister with eyes that were dry and clear and frighteningly calm. "I need you to listen to me. I am not going to confront him. Not yet. Not directly. Because if I confront him now, he will deny it. He will manipulate the narrative. He will turn this entire house against me, the way he has always done, and I will end up looking like the unstable wife who found an old document and lost her mind over it. I want something better than a confrontation. I want the truth to destroy him in front of every single person who watched him destroy me." Mavis stared at her sister for a long moment. Then slowly, deliberately, she sat down. "Tell me the plan." What Beatrice proposed was so precisely calculated that Mavis, a woman of science who trusted data over drama, felt the hairs rise on her arms as she listened. Beatrice would fake a pregnancy, not recklessly, not obviously, but with the kind of careful, medically informed authenticity that only a sister who was also a nurse could help her execute convincingly.
Mavis was initially disclined, but her second instinct, the one shaped by 5 years of watching her sister be dismantled by a man and his mother, overruled it completely. She taught Beatrice everything. The exact fatigue that hits in early pregnancy, sudden and heavy like a coat thrown over your shoulders without warning. The specific food aversions, the heightened sense of smell, the way a newly pregnant woman unconsciously touches her lower stomach without realizing she is doing it. She procured a false positive test strip with the quiet efficiency of someone who understood exactly what justice sometimes requires. 3 weeks later, Beatrice chose her evening carefully. Kenneth relaxed after dinner, guard completely down, and she looked across the table at her husband with bright, beautiful eyes and told him they were expecting a child. The smile that died on Kenneth's face before it fully formed told her everything her medical reports had already confirmed. He knew. He had always known. And now, finally, so did she. The family meeting was Madame Agatha's idea. Kenneth had gone to her first, spinning his carefully constructed lie about Beatrice's infidelity, painting himself a wounded, betrayed husband with the kind of convincing performance that comes naturally to people who have been lying for years. Madame Agatha, who had spent 5 years sharpening every weapon she owned against her daughter-in-law, received this information like a woman who had been waiting for precisely this ammunition. She organized everything swiftly. The elders, the extended family, the neighbors whose opinions she had been carefully cultivating for years. She wanted witnesses. She wanted an audience for Beatrice's final humiliation. She did not know she was organizing her own. The day arrived cold and deliberate, like justice tends to arrive. The compound was full. Plastic chairs arranged in a wide circle, elders seated with the grave authority of men preparing to deliver a verdict they had already decided.
Madam Agatha positioned at the center, magnificent in her best Ankara, radiating the satisfaction of a woman whose cruelty was about to be legitimized by tradition. Beatrice arrived simply dressed, carrying a brown envelope, and sat where they directed her without argument. Kenneth would not meet her eyes. She noticed that immediately and filed it quietly. They spoke for a long time. Adulteress, abomination, bastard child. The words came from multiple directions, building in intensity, each speaker feeding the next, the room vibrating with collective moral outrage directed entirely at one woman who sat through it all with her hands folded and her face utterly still. Then, Madam Agatha leaned forward for her closing declaration, the moment she had choreographed in her imagination since Kenneth first brought her the lie. Beatrice raised one hand, gently, almost politely. "I am not pregnant," she said clearly and unadorned. "I was never pregnant." The room shifted instantly, confusion replacing certainty, the momentum of collective judgment suddenly losing its footing. "I faked it," Beatrice continued, her voice steady and unhurried, filling every corner of that compound, "because I needed every person in this circle to witness what my husband does when he believes his wife is carrying a child he knows is impossible for him to father." She opened the brown envelope and placed Kenneth's medical report on the table. Beside it, she placed the results from both hospitals confirming her own perfect health. Then Mavis stepped forward from where she had been standing quietly at the edge of the gathering, not as a sister, but as a qualified medical professional, and explained every document in language so precise and plain that not one elder in that circle could question or dismiss it. The silence that followed was total. Madam Agatha's magnificent composure collapsed so completely and so suddenly it was almost difficult to watch. The woman who had called Beatrice a dry vessel, a waiting room, a rock that could not produce water, sat with both hands pressed over her mouth, tears streaming freely, staring at her son with an expression that contained something far more painful than shame. It contained the specific devastation of a mother who realizes she has been her son's instrument without ever knowing it, that her cruelty had not been righteous, it had been useful to him, and he had let her spend it without a single warning. Kenneth stared at the table. He had nothing, no deflection available, no narrative to reconstruct, no table to turn. For the first time in their marriage, he was completely, utterly exposed, not by an argument, not by a confrontation, but by the patience and intelligence of the woman he had spent years trying to convince had no value. Beatrice stood. She looked at Madam Agatha directly, not with hatred, but with the clear, level gaze of a woman who no longer requires anyone's validation to know her own worth. "You tormented me for 5 years on behalf of a lie your son told you. I do not hate you for it, but I need you to understand what your blind loyalty to him cost me, and what it cost you, because you spent 5 years destroying an innocent woman and calling it motherhood." She turned to Kenneth last. When she spoke to him, her voice did not waver once. "You knew before our wedding. You chose me anyway, not because you loved me enough to be honest, but because you needed someone to absorb the blame for something you could never face about yourself. If you had told me the truth, we could have sought solutions together, explored other options, faced it as partners. Instead, you chose to let me believe I was broken. You chose to let your mother treat me like a burden. You chose your ego over my dignity. Every single day for 5 years. She placed the divorce papers on the table. "My lawyer will be in touch, and you will be hearing from the court about damages, because what you did to me has a name and it has consequences." The begging started immediately. Madam Agatha reached for her with trembling hands, tears destroying her carefully powdered face. Elders who had arrived to judge were now appealing for calm, for reconsideration, for the kind of mercy they had not extended when they believed they held the power. Beatrice picked up her envelope, smoothed her dress, and walked through that circle of people the way water moves around stone, without force, without urgency, unstoppable. Outside, Mavis's car was waiting, engine running. The back seat held 2 suitcases containing everything Beatrice needed for the life that was waiting for her on the other side of this moment. She got in, closed the door, exhaled once long and slow and completely. Mavis looked at her. "Are you okay?" Beatrice looked back at her sister, this woman who had refused to let her drown. And for the first time in 5 years, the smile that crossed her face was not performed, not polite, not carefully constructed to keep the peace. It was real, fully, freely, finally real. "Drive," she said, and Mavis drove. Remember this: a woman who truly knows her worth cannot be permanently destroyed. She can be delayed, but she cannot be finished. And if this story moved something inside you, if you held your breath at any point, if your chest tightened, if you found yourself whispering finally when Beatrice walked out of that compound, then you already belong here. There are more stories like this one waiting for you on Folktales by FP. Subscribe, turn on your notifications, and stay close, because the next story is already coming and you genuinely do not want to arrive late.